One, two, three. It's Jim Smith, who's been a resident of Chicago, or of Gary, since 1948. And Jim, you're a worker. We're not doing it yet. You're a worker for Hatcher, right? For Mr. Hatcher?
Well, indirectly.
What do you mean indirectly? Everybody's working for him?
Well, I mean, just about all his workers, I feel, though, is voluntary.
Jim, you've been a resident of Gary since 1948, is that?
Since 1948.
We're in the Dick Hatcher headquarters at 20th and Broadway in Gary, and I haven't seen excitement like this in a long time. Right here is Jim Smith, who's a resident of Gary since 1948. Have you seen excitement like this for a long time, Jim?
None whatsoever.
And you worked for Mr. Hatcher, haven't you?
Not directly, but indirectly.
And how about your friends? Have they worked for Dick Hatcher?
Well, I think just about all his workers are direct workers in an indirect manner on a voluntary basis.
All these citizens.
The desire for man, to his standard, to fulfill the desire of his promise.
Now, what are the chances now? The returns haven't started to come in yet, and there's a lot of excitement here. Everybody must be anticipating a win.
Well, I feel as though, with my anticipation, his chances, 100%.
Well, then, what do you think Mr. Hatcher's first move will be when he takes office?
His first Hatcher will comply with his promise he made to the voters who have put him into office.
What, out of all of those promises, what one is most important to you as a resident of Gary?
As a resident of Gary? Well, I have never analyzed one individual promise of Mr. Hatcher. But I think every promise he made is profitable to every citizen of Gary, Indiana, regardless of his race, creed, or origin.
Very good. Thanks very much, Jim. Appreciate it. Nice talk to you. Or where the returns are coming in are inside the city hall here, and it's in the middle of a lot of turmoil that they're counting the votes. There are only a few things that are certain right now. It is certain that no matter who gets in, Joe Radigan, it is certain that if Republican Joe Radigan takes the mayor's seat, that crime, vice, and prostitution, which has been running rampant here in Gary for many years, is in trouble. It is also certain that if Negro Democrat Richard Hatcher gets into office, that vice, crime, and prostitution are in trouble. There are a few other things that are certain in Gary. The South Shore train is running, the open hearths are hot, and they match the campaign that went on here for the last 3 months. Cut it. You rolling now? It is also certain that the people of Gary will wake up tomorrow morning with a new mayor. A new mayor, no matter who it is, that's going to do something about Gary, Indiana. Tim Connor at City Hall in Gary. The returns are still coming in here to this election center here in the City Hall in Gary, and it's too early to tell, really, who has won. We're talking about whether the people of Gary have elected a Negro Democrat or a white Republican as mayor. That is uncertain, but what is certain, that tomorrow morning, the people of Gary are going to wake up with a new mayor. Katz, take it, new mayor. The returns are still coming in at the election headquarters here at City Hall in Gary. It is still too early to tell whether the people of Gary have elected a Negro Democrat or a white Republican as mayor of their city. That is uncertain. There are a few things that are for certain, that 85% of the people registered to vote have turned out at the polls. That is for certain. It is also certain that this has been one of the most hotly contested mayoral races in the nation, and for sure here in Gary. The steel mills, let's cut it right there. There are a couple of other things. There are a couple of other things for sure. There are a couple of other things for sure. The Democrats have run this city since 1906, practically, since the city was built. And vice, crime, and prostitution have run rampant most of those years. When the people of Gary wake up in the morning and they've elected either Joe Radigan, a white Republican, or Richard Hatcher, a Negro Democrat, the city is probably going to be cleaned up. Tim Connor at the Gary City Hall in Gary. Jesus, what kind of a report was that?
Okay, ready?
Hello, two. Very good. Fine.
Wait, hold on. Wait, do that.
You have up now.
A little bit more, go. Okay.
Colonel, you have a long and impressive title. What are your responsibilities going along with that title?
Well, actually, I am the director of the program office.
Colonel, that's a long and impressive title. What are your responsibilities?
Well, actually, Tim, I am the program director for military communication satellite programs for the U.S. Air Force, which in turn, of course, is procuring, designing, and developing these satellites for the Department of Defense.
How many satellites do you have? That's when your last satellite was launched?
Our last satellites were launched on the 1st of July of this.
Is that when your last satellite was launched?
Actually, our last satellites were launched on the 1st of July of this year, of 1967.
And that was what? What was its name?
We had a multiple payload launch at that time. We had 3 of the initial defense communication satellites on that payload, and in addition to that, we had 3 other experimental satellites, a total of 6 in that particular launch.
Now, this is a model of one of your satellites. Can you explain a little bit?
Question? Bob Skill.
Colonel, this is a model of one of your satellites. Can you explain it and somewhat of its functions?
Yes, Bob, this is a very...
I'm Bob Skill, Tim.
Colonel Gibson, we have a model here of one of your satellites. Can you explain a little bit about it?
Yes, and it has honeycomb webs on each of the 8 panels on which we actually mount the equipment within the satellite itself.
This vehicle actually spins. This vehicle actually spins in space. If I were a company commander or, say, a battalion commander in Vietnam, would I be able to make use of your satellites?
I would like to emphasize at this point, this program is truly a tri-service program, Tim. The Air Force had full responsibility for the design and development, production of the satellites, as I mentioned earlier. The Army, with the U.S. Army Stratcom Agency at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, had full responsibility for the design, development, the deployment, the installation of the Earth terminals that make up the part of the system, and the Navy had responsibility for developing and installing their shipboard terminals. All of these go to make up the initial defense communication satellite system, a truly global, the first worldwide global communication satellite system. If a field commander, a company commander in the field...
Cut it just a second, Dave. Colonel Gibson, let's take it again. Colonel Gibson, you've got 17 of these satellites well into orbit now, working well. What about the future of your system and your program?
Well, certainly as a future...
Switchboard?
Tim, I'll tell you, off the top of my head, I absolutely think the day will come when we'll have men running communication switchboards and satellites in space.
Well, they'll probably get extra pay for that, right?
I'm quite sure there'll be something connected with it.
Colonel Gibson, thank you very much. It's been nice talking to you.
I enjoyed it, Tim, very much. Thank you.
Colonel, how many satellites do you have in orbit now? Colonel Gibson, if I were a company or a battalion commander in Vietnam, could I make use of your satellites for communications?
Could you repeat that, Tim?
Yes.
And kind of smile on this last one.
Okay. Colonel, now I can picture in 1984 men manning these communication satellites in space. Is that a possibility? No, Tim, you're actually full of shit.
One of these, you're watching the damn thing, one of these night shows or something. And they had somebody on there, I forgot.
Okay. Going so far, sir.
Well, I think it's going quite well. It's going along our plans. I'm sure that we are going to win. The vote is heavy, and I'm sure that we will be successful as we have been all the time in the past.
You look very tired.
Well,
Have
I
you been
am.
working?
Yes, I have, for about a year and a half.
All right, sir. Now, I want to ask you one question. You said the vote is heavy. Can you compare it to other votes in past years?
Oh, I would say that the vote is at least 20% higher, heavier than it has been in past years.
Would you say that nearly 85%?
Oh, we expect to get 90% in Midtown.
Here in this section?
Lincoln, Nebraska. Blue arrow shade keeps on softly and softly, as if you were shaving in the rain. That's
All right. The returns are still coming in here in Indiana's second large.
My cue, Tim. I'll give you a verbal cue. Wait a few seconds. Okay.
The returns have started to come in, but it is still too early to tell whether the people of Gary have chosen a Negro Democrat or a white Republican as their mayor. The Central Election Office
That's an interesting experience. Actions of astronauts, the sixth group were the last group of 11 scientist astronauts that reported to Houston a couple of months ago. With the exception of this group, the entire remainder, that should be something like 44 astronauts, are in a crew pool awaiting assignment to a specific flight. The only crew that has been selected and announced thus far is the crew for the next manned Apollo shot, Wally Schirra, Don Isley, and Walt Cunningham. The remaining group of us have collateral duties in which we are given a specific area of the program to oversee. Mine happens to be the preparations for lunar surface operations. All the activities that will take place on the moon between touchdown and liftoff. And we're simply, from this group then, will be selected the next crew. So I have not been assigned to a specific flight. Now, I don't presume to know what you would be interested in, so why don't we ask any questions you'd like?
Doctor, would you be seated, please?
What are we going to be talking about?
Well, a little bit about the appropriateness of the Scout program, I think. I think this is a real wonderful opportunity to train leaders to develop the kind of preparation in young men that are going to be important. Then I'd also like to talk with these gentlemen a little bit about the exploration we're going to try to do in the space program. I think this is the thing that is my most immediate interest. The science that can be accomplished here, and the space travel is simply the vehicle to get us where the interesting exploring is to be done. And I think I'll try to describe to these gentlemen a little bit about two different projects, the first lunar trip and what we're going to try to do in the way of exploration there, and also the first manned orbital laboratory that we will put up at about the same time, which will involve some experiments in the orbital workshop, which is just the upper stage of the booster. We clean out the fuel tank and use that for our laboratory, and also a telescope which will be put in Earth orbit at that time.
You were a Boy Scout yourself.
I'm sure it has. Specifically, there are a number of areas that have given me very good background to build on. You mentioned Dave. This is the booster that is required to get us to the moon, and the one that's, I hope, still in countdown at the Cape for the first test tomorrow. This is the Saturn V. Up to this point, we've only launched the Saturn 1B, which has 1/5 the thrust of this vehicle and is roughly half the size. You can sort of get a scale. This is a man. This is 364 feet. The boarding platform at the crew level is on the 43rd floor of the umbilical tower, which stands next to it. So the first stage, which is this much down here, has 4.5 million pounds of fuel that you burn in 2.5 minutes. It's 15 tons a second, and this takes you up the first 40 miles.
What is the thrust there?
7.5 million pounds of thrust. This stage will be fired for its first time in orbit tomorrow. The second stage, which is this amount, will also be fired for the first time in orbit tomorrow. And this boosts you up to about 100 nautical mile orbit, but the orbit is not circular. So the third stage, which is this device here, has to be fired to circularize the orbit and stabilize you in Earth orbit at roughly 100 miles up. Now, the test tomorrow will certainly go this far. Beyond that, it will lift the payload, which is this section, up to about 11,000 miles, turn around and slam it back into the Earth's atmosphere to test the heat shield on the command module. This will be the third major component that's being tested for the first time, because returning from lunar orbit, you have significantly higher velocities, and hence a much. First part will not be on tomorrow's test, which is the lunar module. Since this will be an orbit-only mission, the lunar module's weight will be replaced by test equipment. This is the vehicle in which the landing on the moon is made. The other portion of it is the command service module. This will be on the test tomorrow. The top section is simply the escape tower in case you have problems and have to abort in the very early phases of the flight. That should be gone after about 3 minutes. So if you're going to the moon, you hook these two things together. You rendezvous just out in front of the booster, just after you thrust for the moon, and you push this ahead of you toward the moon. the crew living in the ice cream cone shaped device in the middle, the lunar module simply being pushed out there to ride you from lunar orbit down to the lunar surface. Tomorrow, the command service module, this section is simply the propulsion system to push this around. This is the part that will go up to 11,000 miles, turn around, slam it back in the Earth's atmosphere, and then the command module will orient itself